Hi, this is Matt Doyle, and I'm here with Bo Cheli. We're both former teachers who are now currently working with Study.com. I have 5 years of teaching experience at the middle and high school levels with English and Spanish, and Bo has 14 years of teaching experience with high school English. I've been out of the classroom for about 3 years, but Bo has just recently transitioned out of the classroom to start working with Study.com about 6 months ago. So he has a fresh perspective when it comes to dispensing classroom advice. So Bo, a lot of new teachers are wondering how they can fill gaps left in their teacher education, and specifically, if there are any tips you have, or any veteran teacher may have, for classroom management.
That is a great question. I think a huge question, because that gap for, I'm sure yourself, myself, when we first started teaching, is a rather big one, because looking back on my teacher preparation courses, there may or may not have been a class titled Classroom Management, but surely enough, when I first got in the classroom, that was my first class in Classroom Management. You never really know until you start teaching how difficult it is when you have 150 students a day, all there for different reasons, all wanting something different, all coming from different backgrounds. I'd almost venture to say there's really no class that can fully prepare you. So it's a great question. There are ultimately gaps. And like most teachers, I spent, a number of years struggling to fill those gaps, and honestly going online, talking to people, finding ways to fill those gaps of how do I control my classroom effectively. And essentially, there came a point when I needed to restart, when I needed to rethink about what I was doing as a teacher. And in doing so, I went back to my father's advice. My father taught for over 40 years. He taught sixth grade, all the subjects. And he used to take me to his classroom every year, twice a year, all the way from kindergarten all the way through high school. And that guy's classroom was something to behold. All these sixth graders, when he walked in the classroom, it wasn't out of fear. I don't even know the word to describe it, but they automatically paid him the respect that he wanted. And as a kid, he would tell me certain quotes like, Bo, you have to know your students as well as you know your curriculum if you want them to know it as well as you need them to. He would say these things to me, and when I first went into teaching, I told him I was going to be a teacher. He reminded me, you have to take time to know your students. You can't just start right away. And like all teachers, especially at the beginning, I knew what I was doing. I had my plan. I had been through my credential program, so thanks, but no thanks, Dad. So I guess to better answer your question, I want to humbly admit that my father was right. You need to start from day one. And the way you need to start from day one, if you really want to have that classroom be the way you want, is you have to get to know your students. So what I want to start by saying to you and answer that question is, don't start to try to fill any gaps. Don't start teaching on day one. Just get to know your students.
Yeah, so it seems like day one is one of the most important days when it comes to setting up your students for success and basically effective classroom management. You're saying it's important to get to know your students. What does day one look like?
Day one in my 14th year looked drastically different from my first year. My first through third or fourth year was about, my day one was my syllabus, seating charts, a big welcome sign, an agenda on the board, and truly what you're going to see in most classrooms, and many times it is effective. For me, it was not. And essentially what I was doing on day one is I was starting my class. The ship was leaving. You better hop on. Mr. Cheli, he knows what he's doing. He's here. And it was, I was under this false assumption, and this may have been truer in my father's time, but I was under this false assumption that they all knew what they were doing there. They all wanted to be there. And because I was Mr. Cheli and I was no longer Bo Cheli, there was a Mr. in front of my name, that they were going to respect me, and there was only a select few that I'd have to single out. That was not the case. So where I am now on day one is, and this always, even to myself, who's done it a number of times now, about 10 times, it still feels a little odd every single time. I go to the front of the classroom and I sit down. I don't have a single syllabus prepared. I don't have a single lesson prepared for that day other than sitting down in my chair.
Okay, so the students have already come into your class.
Yes.
They're there, they've taken some seat, they're talking, and there's you, the front of the classroom, watching this.
Yeah, I'm sitting there much like I am now. And I tend to try to not have any sort of expression on my face, but usually inevitably a smile creeps upon my face when they're all looking at me. And they, sometimes people won't notice at first, or, they'll be talking to each other and they'll think, oh, well, we'll start when he says we're starting. A certain number of time passes where eventually they realize it's been 5-10 minutes. This guy isn't doing anything. And inevitably, that's kind of a funny thing, is because I say the word "this guy" because that's how I want them to see me at first. When I first started teaching, it was, I want them to see me as Mr. Cheli, that respected teacher. I want them to see me as this guy in the front of the classroom. And I want them in their brains to be asking, what is he doing here? Because think about the value of that question. What is he doing here? And what they're going to do eventually is, and again, there's no magic formula here. And I would say of the 10 years I've done this, I've gotten 50 different responses, varying responses, but it all comes down to whether it takes them 2 minutes to all quiet down or 30 minutes. Eventually somebody says, hey, what are we doing here? What's going on? What are you doing? And I always repeat that to them. Yes, what are we doing here? And I kind of give them that almost smug look of, yeah, what's going on? What are we doing? And that is the jumping off point for my classroom. There's 30 of us here, or 30 students, one teacher. What are we doing? And immediately we've broken the mold. Immediately, this is something different. And whether they admit it on that day or they admit to it later, they now feel as if, yes, they went to high school that morning, but they're somewhere different now. They're in a place that they've never been before. Yes, there's desks, there's chairs, but all of a sudden they have a teacher saying, what are we doing here? And the conversations that come from there can go a number of different ways, but inevitably what we've done is we've asked the essential question of the year that I'm going to tie back to every book we read, every essay we write, every conversation we have. What are we doing here?
So do you find yourself explaining to them right away what you're doing there, or do you ask them a series of questions? Once that question comes up, where do you go from there?
I throw it right back at them. Hey, John, what are you doing here? Sam, what are you doing here? Shelley, why are you here? And then, any teacher that's listening to this that has been in the classroom, you can just imagine the number of responses, anywhere from, what, we don't have to be here, I'm out of here. I'm here because I want to go to college. And really, I mean, I could write a list of 1,000 different responses, but that's what I do. I'm now following my father's advice. I'm getting to know my students. Okay, John's here because he fears bad grades and he wants to go here. Sally's here because she fears, working at, a dead-end job because her parents tell her she doesn't get an education. I can go on, but it's funny is in every classroom, you never really have two kids that say, I'm precisely here for the exact same reason. They're all very different. And that's my main goal that day, is to really understand why they're here, because I used to think they were there because they wanted my class. I used to think they were there because their schedule told them to be there. And what's crazy is, I've taught 14 years, but really compared to my father, he would laugh at 14 years compared to over 40. The reason why kids are going to school is changing a lot. Even in my 10 years of asking this question, now it's inevitably, I got a lot of responses of, oh, I just want to get to college, which would immediately open up the discussion of, well, is there anything that we can enjoy here while we're here, or are we just going somewhere else? And again, to teachers that are engaged in this, they can already start to hear the number of conversations that can come out of this. Why does one go to college? What are you going to go to college for? And without getting caught up in the details of it, that first day is just beautiful conversation. And from a teacher's point of view, that day I'm learning some very, very valuable stuff about every single individual of that class. Who's paying attention, who's not listening. And I'm really not disciplining that first day. That first day, I'm a guy, they're students. There are people that are there for a certain reason, or one or another. And that first day, we've just kind of established, it's not formed yet, but it's just kind of a community of people that are establishing why they're there. Inevitably, I try that first day to establish the fact that we are here to learn. Whatever you use that learning for, whether you use it to appease your parents, you use it to get in college, you use it to learn English, imagine that, right? You use it for XYZ reason. We are all here to learn. And that's where we've established the purpose, and I present myself as, all right, I can help you with that. I've been there. At one point or another, I feared college. I was excited about college. I was excited about pleasing my parents in my report card, or I was scared about letting them down. And I let them know that I understand why you're here. And going back to the discipline, you really start to see them as individuals that first day.
So I love that you're getting to know your students by asking them a lot about themselves and trying to understand why they're there. I'm wondering, do you flip that around? Do you also open yourself up to them and kind of explain why you're there as well? I know some teachers have reservations about being too friendly in the very beginning, and so on the first day, how do you approach that?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Matt, because that is asked every time. Well, why are you here? And to that, I would tell teachers, if you're not comfortable answering that question, you're in the wrong room. If you're not comfortable really telling them what you love about teaching, or there isn't a legitimate reason about why you're there other than a job, then there's a whole different set of I don't want to say problems, but different solutions you would consider for that. I tell them why I'm there. And as cheesy as it sounds, I go through my background of my father being a teacher. I go through the background about I had siblings that were teachers, and that to me it is the greatest job in the world. And I immediately call out, this is not something I do for a paycheck. And this is a personal choice of mine. If a kid were to say, how much do you make? I'd tell them, hey, you can look on the district website. You can see how much I make. And that's not why I do it. And I make a pledge right then and there. I said, if you ever hear me complain about my salary, or you complain about the working conditions of a teacher, call me out on it. I tell them that this is a passion of mine. I'm here to help them. I tell them about, the other avenues I could have taken in my life, the other jobs I could have taken in my life, and why I chose teaching. And how, for me, teaching was something that from a young age, I knew I wanted to do. I have a unique experience watching my father teach and, having that kind of emotional connection to teaching. But I also tell them, and this is always received very well and heavily, where I tell them, this job also affords me really quality time with my students and my colleagues. On that first day, I call them, you're my colleagues. We're here together. And it provides real job satisfaction for me, as well as my family, because teaching allows me a good amount of time with my family. And I think most teachers, if they're honest with themselves, would admit to the fact that they love, I don't want to say teachers' hours, because teachers' hours are essentially 24/7, because you're always thinking and preparing and grading. But it does allow you some freedom in that respect. But I'd love to answer that question so that they never doubt my commitment to them. And I also let them know that while I'm there, I am not anywhere else mentally. I'm 100% there, committed to them.
Excellent. Bo, I only wish I had you teaching my English class, because that first day, it sounds a lot better than the first day I had in some of my English classes.
Thank you.
With that, it sounds like we pretty much wrapped up day one. I'm really interested to hear more about your classroom management plan and hope we have time to do so in the future. So thanks a lot, Bo, for sharing your classroom management philosophy, and especially on day one.
Sure. Very happy to talk about more. Like I said, as very, very high level, but happy to go into and answer any more questions you have about the subsequent days.
Great. And that's it for Bo and Matt here with Study.com.